Hello, folks. Welcome to the first official lecture of our online version of CTW II, California Dreams and Reality. I hope you all are doing okay. So, let me just kind of give you a little bit of overview here. Last week, I sent your welcome lecture, and you all now have access to the syllabus and you kind of know what to expect in terms of the way that we're going to be designing this online aspect of the course. Instead of the participation grade, we're going to have discussion questions that you either have one or two a week. Please make sure that you're staying abreast on those because those will count towards your participation grade. Um, and I already kind of gave you the overview of how this quarter we're going to be focusing on a single kind of in-depth project that kind of comprises the entire quarter. And so, all of that being said, hopefully you have the technology that we need. We're being quite minimal with that in terms of just what we're expected to have, just in case people have varying uh, varying access to different kinds of technologies. Unfortunately, we will not be having synchronous lectures. I just feel that we're in too many different time zones, and that can be very stressful to have to just kind of sit through a lecture. So instead, you can, whenever you have the ability, you can log into this lecture. And obviously, it'll contextualize for you the assignments, what we're discussing. So please make sure that you do listen to them. I'll try to make them as interesting as possible, despite the fact that it's rather difficult when you're just being videoed. Okay, but just know that I will always give a lecture every Tuesday and Thursday. So very much like we would be in class, I'm providing those opportunities for you. Okay. In addition to all this, though, since we won't be having much synchronous class time, I will have a drop-in hour every Friday from 11 to 12 Pacific Standard Time. Okay, and that's just if you want to chat or you just want to see each other. Maybe you just want to hang out a bit, kind of like a Zoom hangout that a lot of people have been doing in their personal social lives. So I just wanted to provide that opportunity if you want to feel connected or you just want to be able to ask me a question in that kind of environment. Um, those are all, I've made an announcement that allows you to click on the link to get to that Zoom meeting and we can chat then, okay? So now let's go into the specifics of our project. A couple things that I think would be important to mention in this very beginning is exactly what is this project that you're going to be doing over the course of the quarter, and this thing that you're going to be creating iterations of along the way and for developing the most kind of involved research project that you have done to date. Hopefully, that is the goal. Okay, so what I wanted to do is share with you this preliminary, or I'm sorry, not preliminary, but this culminating assignment that we're going to be doing and that we're going to be building towards for the whole quarter. So this is all available in your Camino. All of the assignments are there, all of the due dates are there. Um, but I just wanted to go over a little bit of this kind of foundational assignment so that we can contextualize our class for the rest of the quarter. So I'm just going to be reading along a little bit. Throughout our course, we have discussed various aspects of the highly mythological place we live in, California and in particular the Bay Area. The region is rich with history, culture, and possesses a unique social and political character. And as a class, we have been exploring the many factors that contribute to and continue to influence the region's dynamic and particular identity, which we know is multiplicitous because of its remarkable diversity. So what your research paper is going to be, you're going to choose a subject, and it can be anything that perhaps at least in its initial interest is related to California. So it can be a California place, an event, a community, an issue in California. And through research, you're going to present this, this issue or place, and then an argument concerning an important aspect of this subject that you've come up with, okay, based on observations and research. And so, in some cases, it's good if it has current coverage. I can imagine there are lots of things to think about since California is kind of always in the national purview and even the world purview. You want to, of course, be thinking about the triangulation of data, which we learned about in our first quarter together. And we want to be thinking about all those compositional strategies that we have brought or that we have learned, and we want to bring them into this particular section of the class. Okay. Now, there are a couple particular requirements for this research-based project that you're going to be doing. One of them is utilizing ethnographic methodology or observational methodology, which in a normal on-ground environment, I would have you literally observe a place for 2 hours and write field notes on it. Obviously, we can't do that. So I'm going to be having you do that in a virtual way, but where we are simply observing and taking notes of that observation. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. We're going to be utilizing multimodal documents in order to kind of create a full resounding research project. Okay? And I think I mentioned that in that initial video, that we're going to be doing a documentary, whether in podcast format or video format. And then one of the requirements for this particular project is also to schedule and perform an interview with an expert in the field of your subject. And this is mainly so that we have an interrogative source, not just published sources, but one where we can ask the questions that are very particular to our interest, and it might be able to attenuate our focus in terms of where we go with this research project. And so this is something that I like to bring up right away, because scheduling an interview with an expert in the subject that you ultimately decide to do your project on requires some forethought, right? It requires you to find a person who would be apropos for the research, to reach out to them to try to schedule an interview, which a lot of times can be fruitless, right? Especially depending on their schedules and their demands. And then, of course, transcribing that interview so that it can become one of the sources for your project. This is something that I'll be working with you over the course of the quarter, but I want you to be thinking about now, even though, of course, you wouldn't know who to interview yet because you don't know what your subject is, okay? So you can read the rest of the prompt that I'm giving you for this project. But the essay is not much larger than anything that you did last quarter. It's a 7 to 10 page essay, but it's going to be way more involved. You are going to be creating a much more nuanced argument, and it's going to be so much more developed as an idea, as something that you're critically examining, that hopefully you really walk away from this quarter feeling very proud of this project, because it truly is collegiate scholarship in the way that we, of course, want you to be thinking about scholarship. And that, of course, takes time and development. So take a look at that assignment, for the specifics, okay? Now, I want to get into some of the particulars that maybe are a little more unique to the project overall. And one of them is this observation requirement that I'm asking you to do. I mean, I'm asking you to observe, in this case, a virtual environments, websites, where you somehow are documenting what you see, and then it raising questions that are intuitive, that emerge just from the observation. This is that ethnographic component of the research methodology. And if you want to read more about what ethnography is, I have a great little article called Ethnography and Its Function in the week 1 module. But ethnography is basically just the study of people. It's the study of society. And in this methodology, which kind of emerges out of anthropology, you utilize a strategy called reflexive observation. And what that means is just that you observe a thing as denotatively as possible. We all know what that word means, right? And we then pay attention to how our mind kind of processes this observation. So the questions that emerge, the kind of associations that we make upon witnessing a thing or observing a thing, really paying attention to those and writing them down, really documenting how our mind goes. A lot of times we censor a lot of the questions that we are asking when we're doing observation, and what we want to do is try to highlight those authentic questions that emerge as a result of any observation, in this case, a virtual one. Okay? So I want to give you some examples of how that has manifested into a project topic for students. Granted, they were doing physical observations, but it doesn't mean that you can't observe virtually. In fact, I have one example of a student that did. Okay, so let me give you just some narratives so that you can kind of see how this went. Okay, my student Aditya. Okay, last year he was in my class and he was from San Jose. He was a homebody. He didn't go out much. He hadn't even been to San Francisco before, except on a class field trip when he was in high school. Even though he's a local person, he just doesn't go anywhere. And so he approached me. He was like, I don't know what to do because I tend to just like to be in my little neighborhood. And I was like, well, where do you go? And he was like, well, really? I'm at home. I'm at school. I go to a coffee shop sometimes and hang out with friends. ... And so I said, well, go to the coffee shop. And he's like, well, how am I going to come up with a really good topic just by observing a coffee shop for 2 hours? But he did. He did the observation, and then he asked a series of questions that eventually became about how coffee culture in California has affected social traditions, especially among people who are young. It has only been in the past 10 or 15 years that young people have really become kind of associated with coffee culture at all. It was always something for older people, people that were, in careers who would take coffee breaks. But now coffee culture is so kind of integrated into even high schoolers, middle schoolers. And so what initially started out as just him observing that, wow, there's a lot of young people in this coffee shop, he made it an entire examination of how Starbucks and the rise of other forms of coffee culture have affected the social traditions of youth. It was a great paper. It was fascinating. It came from a relatively innocuous place, and that is exactly what the observation is good for. I had another student, Antonio, who was an environmental engineer student. And one of the reasons why he came to Santa Clara was that he wanted to be in Silicon Valley, and particularly he was fascinated with Tesla. So he was like, this is my opportunity. So he did his observation at the Tesla plant in Fremont. And he thought he was going to be writing about the virtues of environmental manufacturing and, this move to electric cars. And he was thinking that he was just going to be celebrating the virtues of what inspired him to be an environmental engineer in the first place. It didn't exactly work out that way. From his observations and then through the development of the course, his paper, his investigation eventually became on how solar power and harnessing more solar energy would improve the relations between the United States and the Middle East. So, completely unique, surprising topic for Antonio. He was not someone who was very interested in geopolitics, but his research just kind of ended up in this kind of direction where he discovered it in little moments and became curious. And what it did was it just kind of opened up a whole idea for him about how if the United States focused more on renewable energies, we would have better relationships with world powers and in particular the Middle East. Terrific paper. It was the best thing he ever did for sure. Then I had just another example. I had a student, Simone, and this was really interesting because Simone was a very good student, very good writer, very kind of into school, right? But in the beginning of the second quarter of CTW at her time, she was admitted into the hospital for the first 3 weeks. The story is she had gone to Costa Rica the summer before she started at Santa Clara, and she was helping build houses for homeless folks. And strangely enough, like something that you would only read about in a story, she contracted a flesh-eating bacteria that was starting to eat away at her arm. I know it's kind of horrific. And so she needed to be admitted to a hospital because she needed to engage in chemotherapy. It was the way to beat this flesh-eating organism. Okay. So she was really stressed out. You know, she's contacting me. She's like, I am in a hospital. I'm a resident in a hospital in a chemotherapy wing. You know, how am I going to observe anything in order to satisfy this project? And I told her, observe the chemotherapy wing. I mean, that's where you are. So she did. And her paper, her research project, wound up being on assisted suicide because many of the people in her chemotherapy wing were elderly and they had stage 4 cancer. They were going to inevitably, most likely, perish from the illness. And a lot of these people were just frustrated that their families would not let them go, that their families wanted them to go through the chemotherapy and the radiation. And even though there wasn't much hope for, you know, living too long, maybe you could extend your life for 6 months, but a lot of these people felt like they just wanted to be able to end it to kind of assuage the concerns and stresses of their family, just kind of end the story, right? Really, really fascinating. And she wound up doing an entire examination on that in relationship to the California laws. Fascinating. Last quarter, I'm just going to give you one that was a virtual example. You know, if we start to think like, well, I can't exactly manifest this assignment well if I'm stuck at home, but not the case. I had a student who last quarter observed Tinder. She was really fascinated by hookup culture, and what she did was she set up an account with Tinder and also observed her friends' accounts and observed and documented the way that people communicated to one another through Tinder. And from that, she developed a project and paper that addressed the relationship to these kind of online apps and the proliferation of sexual assault. So she was seeing a relationship between the apps, the kind of behavior that it inspired, partly being hookup culture, but even more so the anonymity of, or the relative anonymity or technological dissociation of Tinder and apps like it, to affecting more sexual violence in these kind of dating circumstances. So completely interesting. She was enthralled by her research, and it all was a digital observation, which of course is what you all are going to have to do to respect shelter in place. So you can begin to start imagining what that looks like. But I will talk more about the actual assignment of observing soon. Not quite yet, though. Okay. What we need to do is figure out, well, what kind of project, what kind of subject matter you're even interested in. So maybe some of you, even by the end of this lecture, already have an idea. You know, there's something that you are really curious about that has been kind of prescient in your mind, and you want to kind of go down the rabbit hole researching about it. Maybe you already have something. For many of you, you might not. And so the very first assignment of the very first discussion that I'm asking you all to engage in is an interest inventory. And what an interest inventory is just kind of amassing externally what you're into, what you tend to gravitate towards, what tends to be in your imagination, and to see those externalized outside of yourself as a way to maybe begin to conceive of, okay, what truly is intuitively fascinating to me that I would want to spend an entire quarter examining, researching, plumbing the depths of in order to reach a more particular understanding of a thing. Okay, so this discussion question, which is in your module, is asking the basic questions like, what do you like to do? What do you tend to research when you go down the rabbit hole? Yeah, so maybe even looking at your browser history. Of course, try to keep it PG-13. But what what are you researching in your free time anyway, and where do you go? Maybe it's Kim Kardashian's butt. That seems relatively silly, but it could actually lead to something. Maybe the fascination with body image, or the way that we popularize sexual attraction, or certain kinds of fads in beauty. Like right now, it's all about being bootylicious. But 20 years ago, it was all about being stick thin and looking like you had been on heroin for 3 years. So, maybe there's something around that if you were to just kind of go down the rabbit hole of Kim Kardashian. Okay. Obviously, you all are going to have very, very different interests. And so the interest inventory is just trying to compile them together. Another one could be like, what about California fascinates you? So the interest inventory, again, is just a way to kind of spark potential ideas that could lead to what it is that you want to investigate, and then that culminates into a full-on research project and paper. Know this. This is really important, you all. You can change your topic. Many of you are going to think that you come up with the topic that you want to focus on in the first couple weeks. But you know what? In your research, you may veer. What I want you to do is really pay attention to that veering. You need to go exactly where it is that you need to be. And you are not committed to anything until you write that rough draft. So you have many weeks to kind of foster the development of the question that you're asking, the subject matter that you engage in. You do not hold any sense of commitment. This is your project, okay? What we are going to do along the way is document your journey, but by no means does it need to stay on a very direct and clear path. In fact, research is all about discovery. Research is about discovering what you truly are interested in. And it's fascinating because a lot of times we think we know what we want to do, but often in that is us censoring our own curiosities. And I really want us to be paying attention to what our true, authentic curiosity is, even if that means abandoning material that we have developed for this assignment historically. Okay? We'll talk more about that, of course, as we chat and we chat and we chat. You know that I have a very available kind of presence in the class. And it's going to be important for us to chat either through email or video chats or through the Zoom drop in, through our one-on-one conferences. We always want to kind of discuss where we are and where we want to go. Okay. So that interest inventory, the very first discussion question that we have in our course is our attempt to kind of start answering that question. Okay. But the first thing that I want us to do is to meditate on the virtue of observation and how we see and perceive. Okay. So your very first assignment in the course, the first thinking paper, deals with observation in a rather interesting way. Okay? I'm going to pull up that assignment and just kind of read it off to you since it's due Thursday. Okay? I am asking you to read two articles. Well, one of them is actually just the intro to our textbook, Habits of the Creative Mind, which, by the way, is amazing. Okay? Please read that. I mean, it is all about the process of writing, and it really does an amazing job. I cannot celebrate this book enough. So it's going to be important for you to read these because it's going to be part of our discussions quite often. Okay? I'm also asking you to read a short but very challenging article. It's called Walking in the City. It's by Michel de Certeau, who is a theorist, a postmodern theorist at that. And it is one of the most challenging texts I've ever read in my life. This excerpt is only roughly 9 pages long, but it's a beast. I'm telling you that now, and it's very intentional that I'm asking you to read it. Okay? After you read the Habits of the Creative Mind intro, and you read de Certeau's lyrical essay, I'm asking you to write your own meditation that first grapples with your immediate understanding of the essay, and then try to address the following questions. What is the difference between the flaneur and the voyeur in de Certeau's essay? What are the virtues of both of these types of city dwellers? And which do you identify with the most? I am asking you to answer these questions, but really to try to make sense of this essay at all. It is not easy. It is very dense. It's poetic. It has a unique structure and has proven to be a very challenging read to anybody. But what I'm asking us to do here is to never shy away from something that is challenging, but instead to try to navigate it, to be in conversation with it, and to glean what we do out of it, and to reflect on that, to meditate on it. It is a form of observation. And a lot of times, what we observe could be considered incoherent or inconceivable, incomprehensible. And that doesn't mean that we reject it. So this is an exercise on multiple levels. At once, it's to have us reflect on a reading that is all about observation, as you're going to find out. But also, for us to be able to wrestle with ourselves and our comprehension of a text, to understand that we never will fully understand anything, and to never reject it simply because we don't fully understand it. And indeed, instead, to reflect on the way we understand a text. That is the goal of this very first thinking paper. And that is due on Thursday. So please tackle these readings that we have to do for Thursday. Write this thinking paper. Know that it's going to be challenging, but move beyond that, okay? Address it head on, knowing full well that you are not a person that knows everything, and you're not expected to. But you certainly will get something out of the text, no matter how difficult you find it to be, okay? Trust in that reading process. There is method to the madness here, okay? So that is your assignment for Thursday. Then on Thursday, I'm going to have another lecture and we'll jump into even more material. But for now, wrestle with these texts, have a good time, and I'll see you Thursday.